Welcome to IB Chemistry exam preparation, exam tips for both standard level and higher level. Today I'm going to cover topic number 1, stoichiometric relationships. To be more specific, I'm going to explain empirical and molecular formula. I'm going also to solve past paper questions for both paper 1 and paper 2. In order to start our lesson for today, we need to go through the definition of both empirical and molecular formula. So starting with the empirical formula, according to the definition, it is the simplest whole number ratio of the atoms or amount in mole of each element present in a compound. So we are talking about the mole ratio presented, and it should be in the simplest whole number ratio. Continuing with the molecular formula, it's the actual number of atoms or amount in mole of elements in one structural unit or 1 mole of the compound. Here we have the actual number of the atoms or the mole number or amount which are presented inside a compound or a molecule. To be more specific, I'm going to explain the definition of each through a simple example. So as a small example, I'm going to give you the formula of glucose. I'm sure that you are familiar with the chemical formula of a simple glucose, which is C6H12O6. So here my first question, what is the mole ratio of the atoms presented inside the molecule? So you will tell me that we have 6 carbon atoms to 12 hydrogen atoms, and I've got another 6 oxygen atoms. If we look at the formula, the first question that we should answer is, this ratio, is it in the simplest formula? Can I simplify it more? The answer is of course. So if you want to simplify the mole ratio presented as a number of atoms, you can simply divide over 6 as a common number. So you're going to find that you have 1 carbon, 2 hydrogens, and finally you have 1 oxygen. If I'm going to take this simplest mole ratio, I'm going to rewrite the formula of glucose. So it will become 1 carbon, 2 hydrogens, and finally I have 1 oxygen. Going back to the definitions, we're going to find that the formula which is given in the simplest way, this is called the empirical formula. So this is the empirical formula of your glucose. But the actual formula, it is named as the molecular formula of the molecule or the compound. So the empirical, it should be the simplest mole ratio, but the molecular, it is the actual formula of the molecule. Going back to the definition, so we can find that the empirical formula should be the simplest. So I will look for, can I simplify or I cannot, but the molecular formula is the actual number of moles. I'm going now to start with a small question to double check that the definition of both empirical formula and molecular formula are understood. The question is, circle the empirical formula, and for each molecular formula we need to state its empirical formula. So let's start with the first row. I'm going to circle the molecules which are presented in the simplest form. So they are named as empirical formula. According to my first row, CH3 is considered an empirical formula. I cannot simplify it more. The ratio is 1 to 3 for the carbon and hydrogen. Looking for C2H4, it's not an empirical since I can simplify, so I'm not going to circle it. Continuing with potassium dichromate, which is K2Cr2O7, it is considered an empirical formula. Here I don't have one common number that can be divided for all atoms presented inside the molecule. So this is an empirical formula. Continuing with the glucose, we considered this example before. Of course, it's not an empirical. CH2O, it is an empirical. The ratio is 1:2 to 1. Continuing with this example, which is for the propane. In order to see whether it's an empirical or molecular, I'm going to rewrite the formula another time, taking into consideration the total number of carbons presented and the total number of hydrogens. I have 3 carbons and I have 8 hydrogen atoms. Now I can answer my question. Is it an empirical? Definitely it is an empirical. So I'm going to circle it another time. So it's so important if you have a hydrocarbon compound, in order to decide whether it's an empirical or molecular formula, firstly rewrite the formula, then decide. Continuing with the ethanoic acid, it is C2H4O2. So I can simplify, it's not an empirical formula. Finally, for the potassium permanganate, it is an empirical formula. You cannot simplify further. According to the question, I already circled all the empirical formulas, molecules, or compound. Now the second part from the question is asking me to find out the empirical of the molecular. So in order to start, I have the first compound or molecule, it is the C2H4. So for the C2H4, I can divide over 2, and my empirical formula will be CH2. Continuing with the glucose, of course we do this before, so no need to repeat it. Finally, I have another molecule that I need to simplify, which is the ethanoic acid, C2H4O2. I'm going also to divide over 2 in order to have our final answer, which is CH2 and O. To double check that everything is right, I'm going only to have a general question, so to make sure that both empirical and molecular formula definitions are done. If I gave you another example, start to think about it, which is the benzene, C6H6. Is it an empirical or molecular formula? Yes, that's right. This molecule is the molecular formula. It's not an empirical formula. And definitely, if I want to rewrite it into empirical, I can divide over 6. So my final answer is CH. And now I have the empirical formula. I'm going now through a question taken from the past paper. It's actually a multiple choice question, and I've got an idea here. The structural formula of dioxin is shown below. What is the empirical formula for the molecule given? In this question, I have the structural formula, so I need to think about what is the chemical formula of this compound. When talking about chemical formula, so you need to count the total number of carbons, hydrogens, and oxygens presented inside the molecule. Here we need to remember that this is organic, which is chapter number 10. So we need to know that each corner in the hexagon structure, it is considered a carbon. So we have to count the total number of carbons presented. We have 6 in each ring. So in total, it is C12. What about this small circle right here? It's not a circle, it's actually an oxygen. So we have 2 oxygens presented inside the dioxin. So it is O2. I'm not done till now. There is something so important I need to remember about the structural formulas for different organic molecules. They have hidden hydrogens to stabilize the carbons. Remember that the carbon, in order to become stable, it tends to form 4 bonds. So if I'm going to take my carbon, which is this labeled one, I will start counting with you the total number of bonds and to think about the hydrogen atoms attached if they are presented. This is a double bond. And here I have a single covalent bond. So the carbon is forming here 3 bonds. So there will be a hidden hydrogen around the carbon. The same situation for the other carbons which are represented in the ring. Now we need to think about the carbon which is presented right here. Do we need a hydrogen or not? In this situation we don't need, since we already have 4 bonds. One is double and another 2 is single. So there is no carbons around these, there is no hydrogen, around the carbons. Now I have other hidden hydrogens presented inside the other ring. So in total, going back to my chemical formula, definitely I have total number counting. I have 4 hydrogens at each, so it is 8. In this situation, I wrote down my chemical formula. Now I need to simplify, so I can divide over 2 as a common number, and your final answer is C6OH4, and I am done. Looking at my possible answers, and the answer it's a B answer. I'm going now to continue with more multiple choices and more ideas taken from the past paper. Which compound has the empirical formula with the greatest mass? Since the question is asking me about the empirical formula, so the first step is to rewrite all of the options that I have into an empirical formula. For A, I'm going to divide over 2. This will become C, and you have 3 hydrogens. I'm going here to divide by 2, so this will become C2H5. For the C, yes, you're going to divide over 5, so it is CH2. Finally, I'm going to divide over 6, so it is CH. Going back to the question, it's asking you about the greatest mass, as if you have 1 mole of this molecule, so it's the greatest molar mass in this situation, and of course, your final answer will be the B answer. Question number 3. For which compounds is the empirical formula the same as the molecular formula? If you look at the options, they gave me the name of the organic compound. After taking Organic Chapter 10, you will be able to write down the chemical formulas of each. So for the methane, it is CH4. For the ethene, it is C2H4. And for the ethanol, it is C2H6 and O. Now I will go back to my question, which is empirical the same as the molecular. So it should be given in the simplest form. And of course, it's the methane and it is the ethanol. So your answer is 1 and 3, and it is a B answer. Continuing now with question number 4. Which compound's molecular formula is the same as its empirical formula? This question is so similar to the previous one. So take few seconds to think about the answer. Remember, you need to find something that is written in the simplest form, and you cannot simplify more. Looking at C and D, definitely you can simplify. Now, looking for A and B, remember to rewrite into the total number of carbon, hydrogen, oxygens before deciding. So this is C2H6O, and this is C2H4O2. So you now start thinking which one cannot be simplified more. It is your answer, and in this question, it's the A. For the last multiple choice, which is number 5, which of these molecular formula are also empirical formula? So another time, we need to think in the same way. I think now that you are familiar on how can you answer. So think about it for a few seconds. C2H6, can you simplify? Is it empirical? Is it molecular? So yes, that's right. This is my empirical formula. For the double, it's a molecular formula. And for a triple, you cannot simplify more, so this is an empirical formula. So now, according to the question, it's I and triple, so another time it's the B. Now we are familiar on the definition of both empirical and molecular formula. Now we're going to the second part of our lesson for today. We're going to learn how to calculate empirical and molecular formula, and these questions, they are for paper 2. Remember, if the questions are for paper 2, you are allowed to use the calculator. So let's start with question number 1. A hydrocarbon contains 85.7% by mass of carbon. What is the empirical formula? Anytime you want to determine the empirical formula, so you've got some steps. They are so easy steps. If you follow them, you will definitely find the final answer. The first thing is to write down the elements presented inside your compound. So since it is a hydrocarbon, so definitely it is made of carbon and hydrogen also. I'm going to put the two elements beside each other. After that, I'm going to put the mass of each. If you look at the question didn't give me the mass as a gram. It gave me the percentage by mass. You can take it the same as the mass exactly. So it is 85.7. Don't round. Take the number exactly as given inside the question. Now, what is the mass of hydrogen? A total percentage for all atoms inside any formula is 100%. So in order to find your hydrogen, you need to subtract the 100% from the 85.7% given for the carbon. So in this situation, the final answer is 14.3. Now the second step is to calculate the mole number. You will divide over the molar mass, and you need to take the molar mass completely as a relative atomic mass from your periodic table and data booklet. Now you will divide. So dividing, the mole number will be 7.135, and here it will become a 14.158. Now you have only one simple step or another one step to complete your answer. After calculating the mole, you're going to have what is called by mole ratio. In this situation, you will divide over the smaller mole number. If you look at the mole of carbon and the mole of hydrogen, you will find the smaller is the carbon. So 7.135 over itself. And here it is 14.158 divided over 7.135. So for the mole ratio, divide by the smaller mole number. After dividing, you're going to find that I have 14.158 divided over the 7.135. It is 1.98. You can simply round as being 2. If you reach this step, so you are done. The empirical formula will be the number that you have obtained in the last step. So you have 1 carbon and you have 2 hydrogens. This is called the empirical formula. So I'm going little bit to summarize the steps, so to make sure that everything is clear. So step number 1 is to look at the number of, or we can say the atoms presented inside the compound. You will write down the mass taken from the question. You will take the mole number after dividing by the molar mass of each atom. You will find finally the mole ratio after dividing by the smaller mole number taken from step number 2. Here you need only to remember that the masses are taken the same as the percentages, and the total percentage of all the atoms inside the molecule will equal to 100% exactly. The second part of the question is to learn how to find the molecular formula, which is the actual formula of the molecule which is given. According to the question, we calculated in A the empirical formula. So let's look for B part. This compound was analyzed by a mass spectrometer and found to have a relative molecular mass of 42.09 gram per mole. Deduce its molecular formula. The point that I'm going here to mention, that the molar mass that is given in this question, it is the molar mass of the molecular formula. So the actual molecule that I'm looking for, it has a molar mass which is 42.09. I'm going now to teach you how to go step by step to calculate the molecular formula. Step number 1, you need to find out the molar mass of empirical formula, and we already do the empirical formula before. So you cannot answer B if you didn't obtain firstly the empirical formula. So my molar mass will equal, I have 1 carbon. So this is my empirical formula, remember that. So it is 1 times 12.01 plus 2 times 101. Using your calculator, your final molar mass is 14.03 gram per mole. Now, after calculating the molar mass of the empirical, the second step, you're going to divide the molar mass of the molecular formula, which is the molar mass given in the question, over the molar mass of the empirical formula that you have obtained in step number 1. The molar mass given is 42.09. I'm going to divide it over 14.03, and your final answer will be a 3. Now the last step, you're going to take the number that you have obtained in step number 3, and you're going to multiply it by the empirical formula. So it will be, as a final answer, 3 carbons and 6 hydrogens. This final answer is the molecular formula of the compound. If you want to calculate the molar mass of this compound, it should be equal to 42.09. If you obtain this number, so this is an indication that your final answer is 100% correct. We're going now to answer another question, which is so similar to the previous one. So question number 2 now. A 2.65 gram sample of salmon contains 0.7 gram of chromium. So the first element presented is chromium, and 0.65 gram of sulfur. So I have my sulfur. And finally, 1.3 gram of oxygen. So I have an O. I'm going now to put the mass under each. In this question, they gave you the masses direct, so it's not the percentage by mass. So some questions may give you the percentage, others may give you the masses. I'm going now to put the mass of each atom, 0.65, and finally I have 1.30. I'm going now to calculate my mole number. So I'm going to divide over the molar mass of a chrome, which is 52 from the periodic table. This is 32.07. And finally, you have the 16. Using the calculator, this is 0.0135. This is 0.0203. And we have 0.0813. Now I'm going to divide over the smaller, so I have the mole ratio. So I will be dividing over the smaller, which is the mole of chrome. So 0.0135 divided over 0.0135, and finally 0.0135. Using the calculator, this would be a 1, this would be a 1.5, and I have here a 6. I have something so important here. I need to mention it as a study tip for your external. Anytime you have a decimal of half, so a very important question should be inside your mind. Is it allowed to round? Can I simply write 2 for sulfur, or can I write 1 for sulfur? Of course, you cannot round. You need to multiply all atoms by 2 in order to overcome the decimal. So if you multiply by 2, the chrome, it will become a 2. For the sulfur, it will become a 3. And finally, you will have a 12. So your empirical formula it will be Cr2S3O12. So it's so important to remember, if you've got a half, it's not allowed for you at all to round. Now continuing with the question is asking me to find the molar mass. The molar mass is given, It's asking you to determine the molecular formula. To determine the molecular formula, we've done with the empirical formula. So now I need to continue my question. To find out the molecular formula, so I have some steps that will help me in answering the question as mentioned earlier. So I will try to answer it right here, so to make all the questions together beside each other. So the first step, you're going to find the molar mass of your empirical, which is Cr2S3O12. So you have 2 Crs, you have 3 sulfurs, and you have oxygens, which are 12. I'm going to write down a final answer, and you can double check that you have this answer as well. I think that you are familiar in calculating the molar mass. So it is 392.21 gram per mole. Now the second step, you need to divide the molar mass given for the actual molecule. So it is 1176 over the empirical formula molar mass. After dividing, it will become a 3. Your final step now is to take this 3 and to multiply it by your empirical formula, which is Cr2S3O12. So now you are actually done, as you can rewrite your molecular formula. So my molecular formula is Cr6, sulfur 9, and oxygen 36, and you are actually done. I'm going now to give you something that will help you in your external past paper. In this question, we saw that we have some cases into which the decimals cannot be rounded. So the big question is, what are the decimals that you cannot round? So the decimal numbers that you cannot round. Inside the past paper, they may ask about the half as this question. They may give you also 0.33. There could be also 0.66. Another one could be the 0.75. And I have also the 0.25. These decimals, if they appear when you calculate the molar ratio, so you cannot simply round. If it's a half, you will multiply by 2. If it's a 0.33, you will multiply by 3. 0.66, you will multiply by another 3. 0.75, it's a 4. And finally, this one is also a 4. Here you need to remember that the number into which you need to multiply by, it is the number that will help the decimal to be a whole. So inside the exam, you can simply take out your calculator and try. So if you want to go through, for example, 0.66, you can start with 2. It will not be a whole number. So you will start with a 3. It will give you a whole number, and so on. Actually, these are the decimals that are usually in the past paper. You will find them. I hope that this study tip will help you when applying on empirical and molecular formula calculations. I'm done with my lesson for today. I gave you the tips for empirical and molecular formula as basic information. There will be another video, and it is another lesson into which we're going to continue in empirical and molecular formula. But in this situation, we will upgrade the questions and we will go through some other ideas inside the past paper which are so important. I hope that I can see you in another lesson. Thank you for today.